3. I'll go on to number 4, and then I'll be done in 5 minutes. Okay. Back. Is this it? One. Okay. Execution. This is the C2C diplomacy. I'll go very quickly on this. Unleashing and tapping Israel's finest resources by maximizing the user-generated age in C2C diplomacy. We're starting to see this, but I would agree we're not seeing nearly enough of it, and we need to really push the envelope to make this happen, okay? And we've got to seed it a little bit. We've got to seed it more from not just the bottom up, but a little bit from the top down, too. Now, here's a great example from the bottom up of a MySpace page that a friend of mine sent me that you guys have got to check out. Young people making Israel cool on their own, doing out there stuff. It's awesome. Here's an example, 2 things of what's happening in the Middle East world that a friend of mine who's very connected to activism and human rights in the Middle East sent me. Okay? One of the points of execution I call the producer. Not for Mel Brooks, but basically a very important paradigm for me to emphasize to you. Okay? I'm doing a technique we call media training right now. I'm flagging. I'm putting a flag in the ground and saying, this is important. We need to change our mindset. We are no longer just communicating through the filter of the media. We are the media. We own the media. We create the content, and we distribute the content. But it's not as simple as build it and they will come. It's build it and promote the shit out of it. Okay? So we have to do both. They work in parallel. And because we're not very good promoters, we can come up with a great concept, but then it sort of falls flat. Hence, like Israelis in the Silicon Valley, known as Roman candles. Starts up strong and then it fizzles out. Okay? Not always, but too much of the time, given the prowess of the technology often. That's my own view. So we have to see ourselves as the producer, not just getting on our knees and pitching. Not that we do enough of that. We should be working more with the Foreign Press Corps here in Jerusalem. This is where the news happens, etc. New people on the bus. I talked about this earlier, talking about animators, video artists, designers, actors, comedians, architects, sculptors, bringing in them to a creative services, Israel's creative services department. I see this as part of a much bigger part of Dovrut, spokesmanship. We put spokespeople on the top because that's also antiquated. Because the only way we can get our message is to have a spokesperson. That's also very old school. We still need good spokespeople, and then we need more of them. But that's not the only way for us to get out our message. Next. Make it mandatory. So I talked about these spokespeople, creation of the IDF Creative Services. I talked about Hasidic Boy Chicks in the Hood. Boy Chicks in the Hood, by the way, someone wrote a book with that name. Very funny book, by the way. I suggest you read it. It came out about 10 or 12 years ago. So it's not just the tattoo. It could also be people that are very observant and proud of being observant, and it's cool to be observant. And getting behind that and owning it. Entrepreneurs in action. I talked about the Harel Margalit roving ambassador example. Hope you likes that idea. Farm system. You know, how we scout classical musicians, prodigies, we need to do the same here. We need to really look, especially the Palestinians a few years ago when they had some Ivy League, American accented spokespeople. We need to identify our stars. Israel Peace Corps, I'm not the first one to suggest this, a lot of people have, but a different idea in terms of C2C diplomacy, ceding power to the citizens through bloggers, podcasts, wikis, etc., and sharing their Israel. Okay. Before I wrap up, let me talk about one of the toughest situations. A lot of this sounds great, optimistic, but I want you to remember I am preparing. One of the reasons I talked about back to basics and writing an op-ed during a war is, we're living in precarious times. Chas v'chalila, there's another bad situation. We need to get our fundamentals down. We need to block and tackle better. Okay, so it's not just being creative and throwing the bomb to the end zone. Sorry for the American analogies. Can't help myself. And the sports analogies get a bit tired. But we need to do more of that. So we have to ground it. But at the same time, we have to think creatively. So let's talk about the Arab world for a second. That's our toughest audience. I would suggest, and this comes very much from a friend of mine who works directly in this area, proactively challenge young people in the Arab world. They want to be challenged. We can challenge them in a way that their governments don't. Their governments suppress them. We want to challenge them. Seize the reality. They're online. They're fascinated by Israel. They're obsessed by Israel. For Israel, it's like the forbidden fruit. Can't we take advantage of that a little bit better? Be the voice to engage, challenge, befriend them. And here's a more fun idea. Launch a Stop the Dysfunction campaign in the Arab world. You know, we've seen a lot of successful Israeli Hasbara in terms of broadcasting in Arabic, broadcasting in Farsi. This is just another chapter in that world, but maybe a more sophisticated new media chapter. In Arabic, to demonstrate that female genital mutilation, honor killings, imprisonment of democratic advocates, graft, lack of education, poverty, and anti-Israeli propaganda is all part of the same dysfunction. And people know that. And the poor people sitting in jails not far away from where we're sitting right now, they know that. And when we create a different kind of structure, we can say things that we can't say now when everyone's a government spokesperson. We have more latitude. Next. So here are a few tactics on that. I'm talking about speaking online in Arabic. Test the tolerance. This is a friend of mine came up with this idea. Imagine a young Jew walking down the street in Saudi Arabia wearing a kippah, and we post it on YouTube. What would the reaction be? How would that individual be treated? I don't know.
It was actually
was there something like that?
Yeah, there was a commercial.
Interesting.
Israeli television selling something, but they showed like an army guy with a shirt walking around like an Arab
Interesting.
city.
Did not know. Well, I think we need to do more of that. There is some importance and shock value. Here's a humor them on the protocols of the elders of Zion. You know, that is sold everywhere in the Arab world. They actually take it as the gospel. I think we can make fun of it in Arabic, and so they can understand just how ridiculous it is.
They made a TV series out of it in Egypt.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, terrible. We're all suffering. Sterot. Showing webcams, the suffering on our side. You know, Al Jazeera has an industry built around showing suffering in the Arab world. We're not quite as comfortable with that. And granted, we don't always want to show the downside. We want to show our strength and prosperity, but there's a time and place for everything. Peace. Get on the peace train. Okay? So even though I'm suggesting communications at times have to be very tough-ass and hardcore, and we don't take shit, and it's not Israel has the right to defend itself, you know, which is stating such a ridiculous, obvious kind of thing and gets no pickup anymore and falls flat. It's okay to be the tough guy. It's okay to kick some butt sometimes, because we have to, because we're living in a dangerous place. But on the other hand, if we don't have hope, if there's no hope for the future, then we're dead in the water. Next. Okay, conclusions. Just 2 more slides. There are some elephants in the room that I haven't hit head on, okay? But I don't know if we've tamed them, that we've made them more manageable. The whole too Jewish thing. I say J-State meets J-Day, vice versa. We want to make Jewish identity relevant and different and sexy, okay? That doesn't mean there's not room for minorities, and there are, and I get to that in a moment. But if we don't take ownership of the fact that having a Jewish state is a very cool thing. And by the way, maybe, and I'd like to challenge you with the question, do we even want to use the term Zionism anymore? Is Zionism so damaged and so toxic in terms of the FUD that's been thrown at that we relegate it to the history books and we just talk about J-State? We talk about something else, okay? For something for you, I'm seeing some nodding of heads, and I want to challenge you guys on that and hear what you're thinking about it, because I'm sure